If my neighbor's jackhammer starts up again, I'll mute.
I was doing a call with Council President Brendeman on Tuesday, and she had gone outside because her boys were inside, and she'd gone outside and was sitting on the porch, and right before we went live, her next door neighbor started mowing the lawn.
Oh, no. Oh.
All right, good morning, everyone. If you're just joining us, this is normally the time of the business council meetings where we use for networking, although it's a bit harder in this format. So go ahead, grab your coffee and get settled in. We'll begin the program in 1 minute. Okay, I think we're gonna get started. Take it away, Shannon.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks, Evie. Welcome to the third Maplewood Area Business Council meeting of 2020. My name is Shannon Watson. I'm the Director of Public Affairs with the St. Paul Area Chamber of Commerce.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Jeff Thompson. I am the Community Development Director with the City of Maplewood. So thanks for joining us. As Shannon said, this is our third one of the year. Our last in-person one was back on March 11th, and that was on census data and using other sources of data in your businesses. But how different the world has changed since that meeting in March. So we appreciate you coming and doing this virtually as we've gone to the online format in the interim for our business council.
We have all learned to use a lot of new technology in a short amount of time. One piece of technology that is the same is we do welcome participation via Twitter. Just use the hashtag Maplewood Area Business Council, all spelled out. It's a long one, but if you have a question for our panelists, you can use the question button at the bottom of your screen to type it in.
Great. Well, without further ado, I'd like to welcome our legislative delegation from the area today, Representative Peter Fisher, Senator Susan Kent, and Senator Chuck Weger. And Shannon will lead us in an update on the past legislative session and the special session starting soon. So, Shannon.
Thanks, Jeff. I think we'd like to start by having the three of you introduce yourself, talk about how long you've been a part of the legislature, and then committee assignments or particular areas of focus. So let's do that in alphabetical order. So Representative Fisher, that puts you up first.
Well, thank you. I was just trying to make my notes so I could remember everything there. So first of all, once again, I'm Peter Fisher. I represent 43A. That is a big chunk of northern Maplewood, southern part of White Bear Lake, Birchwood, Willarney, and Mahtomedi. I've been in the legislature now for 8 years. I'm going to be running for my 5th term. And currently I serve on a variety of committees. I serve on the Health and Human Services Policy. I serve on Environment Finance. I serve on Housing and Finance. And I chair the committee on the Water Division, which is a new committee that the legislature started this past 2 years. And then also there are 2 joint committees that I'm on. There's a joint subcommittee on water between the House and Senate. I'm co-chair of that. And a new joint committee between the House and Senate on housing affordability. And I'm also co-chairing that. We had just gotten started at the beginning of the year when COVID hit. So they're kind of on those 2 joint committees, we're kind of in hiatus right now, trying to figure out how do we do our work, which is normally much more personal and face-to-face, which is kind of hard to do through Zoom calls. So we're trying to figure out our path forward in those areas.
Mm-hmm. Senator Kent.
Thank you, Shannon, and thank you all for joining us this morning. This is always a great event, and I wish I could be with you in person drinking coffee at the community center, but this is good to see you this way. I'm Susan Kent, State Senator for Senate District 53, and my district includes the city of Woodbury, Lowndes Fall, and then I have the southern parts of Maplewood and Oakdale. I was elected at the same time Representative Fisher was. We both have been in for 8 years, and because of the way that Senate terms are different, I'll be seeking my 3rd term this year, and looking forward to representing the people of this great area a few more years. I serve on it's been a long time since we've sat in committees. I serve on the E12 Education Committee with Chair Weger, I am also on the Transportation and Public Safety Committee and the Rules Committee. And this year I was elected as the Senate DFL leader for our caucus. And so that has been certainly an interesting role in this past session, which has been beyond unique.
Absolutely. Senator Uyghur.
Good morning, everybody. I will just give a brief bio too. I'm a lifelong resident of the area, product of area schools from Richardson to Maplewood Middle School and North High, and then went on to Hamline University and eventually getting the law degree. I have worked actually for the St. Paul Area Chamber of Commerce back 25 years ago and managed a number of the area chambers prior to going to the St. Paul Chamber, and then we brought a merger with St. Paul area, which kind of the background long ago. And so I have very good memories of all that evolution that took place. I do have 5 kids, 5 grandkids, and et cetera. So just, you know, there's people will ask, you know, a little bit more about you. Sometimes that's it in a nutshell. In terms of public service, I have been involved in my community my entire adult life. I was first elected to the school board at age 21 for North St. Paul, Maplewood, Oakdale, eventually became the chair of the board. I also served on the Metropolitan Council, appointed by Rudy Perpich. I was elected 24 years ago to the state senate, and back then and today, forever, my top priority has always been for education and providing the best opportunity for students to achieve their potential. And we have a number of assignments that we're involved in. I am the ranking member for E12 Policy and Finance now. Senator Kent has been part of that committee from the get-go, and we have lots of initiatives. It's so important for education in terms of, among other things, preparing our future workforce, and our accountability matrix for that is the world's best workforce. And so we put out a number of things. Each school district will show what they're doing, or charter school, as to what we can do on addressing the opportunity gap, for addressing the issues for graduation, et cetera. So education's my passion, and it's a key responsibility. I also serve on the bonding committee, or capital investment as it's called, where we have put together a number of recommendations on infrastructure improvements throughout Minnesota. I also serve on local government committee. And like Representative Fisher, I serve on the water subcommittee. It used to be the Water Commission. It's reformatted now through the Legislative Coordinating Commission, but I am active on water policy as well. So those would be a few of the items that I'm active on, and look forward to our discussion. And as I pointed out earlier, I'm on another Zoom call, which was set before this event at 8 o'clock with Century College, but I'll be able to stay a little bit later, and they're aware of the schedule conflict. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator Uyghur, and we appreciate you making those meetings work. I know back-to-back and conflicting meetings is not something that's unusual for the legislature, particularly during session, but this year got a little weird with the physical separation of the members of the legislature, all the issues that you all were working on in February, suddenly mid-March, like that all come to a screeching halt. So let's talk about that for a second. How did that process go? How is it working out with the remote legislating? Senator Kent, let's go to you first.
Well, yes, this has been a remarkable session, because then I think you summed it up well. We started out with sort of a list of things we wanted to tackle, and suddenly everything got changed. And it really is in that key heart of the session where everything was so shut down. Partly, legislatures are not at all set up to work remotely. I mean, we are very much designed to be open and public and connected, and to have people from the public and stakeholders come in and talk to us on a regular basis. And obviously that is not healthy in the middle of a pandemic. And we were very cognizant of our potential role as a vector. I mean, when we've got people coming in literally from all over the state into just a handful of buildings and then going back home, that's not a healthy situation with a a very contagious virus. So I was very impressed with the Senate and House and the state support in terms of being able to quickly turn over into a virtual workplace. You know, we had everybody working at home, just like the health department guidelines were for other businesses and organizations. And, you know, it obviously has created some different ways of working. But you know, we're used to just being able to run down the hall and talk to somebody about a particular issue or something, or just pull people together to address something. It takes setting up a Zoom link now. But it's gone well. Minnesota really was one of the first legislatures to be up and running in that fashion. And so, you know, functionally, it has worked as well as it can, I think. In terms of, you know, what we were able to get done, excuse me, you know, we were able to pass really pretty successfully and working really well together. And again, reminding everybody that we do currently have a divided legislature. So it did require everyone working together, setting aside some of our normal processes of political wrangling to just pass some key COVID-related measures, including money for our public health response contingency account and other health and healthcare related support, food security support for our food banks and food shelves. We passed early on over $32 million in funding for housing and shelter options, because we knew that was obviously so critical for so many Minnesotans, and emergency childcare grants so that we can make sure that that was supported during this time of fluctuations. We also then, from a non-COVID standpoint, I think some of our big accomplishments were that we did finally pass a good emergency and long-term insulin program. And so that made insulin more affordable and accessible to Minnesotans. And this being an election year and a complicated election year, even before COVID, issues about election security have been front and center, and federal funds have been allocated, for example, to all the states. And so we were able to pass legislation to help secure our elections and make sure we had access to those federal funds. Tobacco 21 was a big accomplishment particularly to protect our kids. And that was also a federal conformity piece. So it was important that we did that. And another medical thing we did was reforming the prior authorization process. So, given the challenges of the session, we're pretty proud of what we were able to get done.
Mm-hmm. That's a decent list for a session in general, let alone when you're having to completely turn the agenda on its head. This is traditionally the bonding year. Senator Uyghur, you mentioned that you're on that committee. How is the status of that bill going?
Well, it's still in discussion. I believe we will eventually get a package put together. There's a powerful need to do that. The need is out there. The importance of investing in our infrastructure projects that you are behind. Each of our communities has an interest in this, and so it seems to be just what that amount is going to be. And we we continue to have meetings in a bipartisan way. I believe that the Republican and Democratic leads in each body, we are divided, as Senator Kent mentioned, but they are getting together, I believe today, again, to try to see what amount, there's probably a difference of $1 billion or so, but with low interest and the need to do it. So there's a number of projects that have been rolled out, and we can talk about local impact of what they are, but it's been documented. Committees are very aware of need, and it's what that prioritization is. So it's in progress. I don't know if in the upcoming special session, if it works, there's other items. I certainly will be advocating that, and I know a number of my colleagues in the Republican Party, want to see something happen. So it's the leadership ultimately will have to reach that agreement. And so, it's definitely in progress, continuing to talk about that. And I might mention, as is the tax bill, I'm not sure what's going to happen. I know that Maplewood and Oakdale, I think they're represented in the call. I think I saw you, Mayor Reinke, the need for the Public Works building and, the proposals that you've put together with legislative assistance, which was addressed in the tax bill. Maplewood wanting to do a fire station in the north part of the district. We have had hearings on these. They're in play, but it's at a different level right now as to whether it's going to make it. So, these are on our radar. We multitask, but whether we get there or not, I'm not sure. And I just want to reiterate too, Senator Kent mentioned, a number of the accomplishments that we did make during the past session. And I'm very proud, that we were able to do that. And we were on course to do many more things until COVID intervened. And we've responded the best that we can. I do want to mention the one other item, if I could, that did pass. And we actually did have to work, with a business and other businesses that did have, some objections, but we became the first state in America to put a ban, phased out though, for trichloroethylene, the TCE ban, which has had a great deal of awareness in the media and in a bipartisan way. And actually, the chamber was involved, primarily, the Minnesota chamber, but we thought it very important from the public health interest to get something passed. And it was rather remarkable that we could carve that out in a bipartisan way, notwithstanding COVID, but getting that done. It sent a strong statement and also provided ways for some of those small businesses that were impacted to phase out with some grant help. And so, the business was at the table, but I want you to know that we can work together, and we did, and became a trailblazer on that. So, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Representative Fisher, we were talking before about housing situation, and obviously COVID has affected that. What is moving in that arena?
Well, the big challenges that we're looking at right now is trying to address the needs for rent supports and for mortgage supports out there. There are many people who have been working jobs that barely pay a living wage, and as a result, these are the people that are kind of caught in the situation, being able to make the rent payments and their mortgage payments. And as a result, we've been trying to get together a package out there that will allow support, because while we have the no evictions on, which I think was very important, the problem that comes in is a number of people who have been doing their best to pay the rent, but what happens is each month they go that they're not able to pay their full rent, they dig themselves deeper and deeper into a hole. And unless we provide some support out there, we're going to see a substantial increase in people who are experiencing homelessness. And the concerns I see on this is what I saw back in the Great Recession in 2008 through 2012, is there were many people at that point in time who lost their housing. And the number of youth that, I was used to work, and I still do, work for nonprofits that support youth who are homeless. We saw the homeless youth on the streets explode exponentially, as we did with families who were out there, because families were not making enough to be able to cover the rent. And I'm afraid that as we come out of the situation we are, if we don't have dollars out there to help support these people make the rent payments, that we could see a huge uptick. And normally it's going to be younger people and families who are living paycheck to paycheck. And we've got a substantial part of our population that is in that type of situation. And what makes it worse is we have such a shortage of affordable housing and affordable rental units out there right now that we could be facing a crisis in the immediate future if we're not able to have a good package coming out to support people as the moratorium on evictions ends. And we know that there's issues out there. We already know that there have been people who have been trying to violate the order, and the Attorney General has been acting on that to make sure that people can stay in their housing. And we were seeing some of that with youth who are homeless, is some people took this as the opportunity. Oh, I'm going to get rid of this person and that person. And sometimes it comes down to people are just, some people are in a power position and they like to exert their power over others in sometimes not very productive ways. And it's times like this where that becomes even worse.
Mm-hmm. So Senator Kent, as the leader of your caucus, you are involved in the negotiations for the bonding bill. What's different about that process? What have you learned by having a seat at that particular table?
You know, I've said from the time that, I mean, you know, and I came in as such a citizen legislator, I had never run for office before, you know, going, except maybe high school, right? And so this whole journey for me has been reassuring in a lot of ways, because, you know, as somebody who has been interested in government and how our country and communities work, I haven't had a lot of surprises, which has been good. You know, I feel like, you know, sort of what we were taught in Schoolhouse Rock has largely held true. There are a lot more details in it, and so that's been the part for me that's always the new part. And just because, you know, because there is relative transparency, I know we all wish there could be more. You know, I feel like I have understood a lot about how the process does work among the leaders. And this has been, you know, I have enjoyed working well with all the other three caucus leaders and with the governor's administration and his administration. And, you know, we've had very good dialogues and how we get things done. And this has been an interesting trajectory over this session, because, like I said, part of it during COVID, we just set it all aside, and we just said, okay, these are the things we need to get done. We're going to have to, you know, sort of haggle out some of the details, but we really focused on the things that we could agree on. And that's how we moved so much support for Minnesota so quickly in terms of COVID relief. And then we kind of went back to business as usual. And so we turned back into the way we were, but at the same time, it was different because we were meeting remotely and we were being intentional about keeping our floor sessions as short as possible. So it hindered some of it. And now that we're into these last final conversations, and to be honest, and something we haven't really talked about yet since we were focusing on the regular session, George Floyd's murder happened within a week of the end of session. And that obviously has created so much for all of us in terms of looking at our communities, looking at the ways we can do better, and make sure that we are providing much more justice and equity for everyone in every facet of what we do. And it has been stressful, in particular, supporting our members in Minneapolis and St. Paul through obviously really tough times in these past couple of weeks. And so that's been yet another aspect of it. But that part of that meant that, you know, we knew we were looking at a special session around June 12th. Those conversations were really put on hold for almost 2 weeks. And now we've resumed. And so normally I think we would like to walk into a special session with a few more things sort of buttoned up, but we're back at the table, as Senator Uyghur mentioned, talking about bonding and these other issues. We have a few more COVID things that we want to try to do, including support for small business. And then there's the very important conversation around what we can do in terms of what we're seeing in the inequities and injustices in our current criminal justice system.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I was hoping to have Representative Zhang. Did he join? Nope. Was going to join the call. Wasn't able to. Who is a member of the Posse Caucus, who put out several recommendations for bills. And like you mentioned, this seemed to be sort of a turning point, a kind of a watershed moment for a lot of attention being really focused, and maybe an opportunity to get some of those things done, while also balancing the nuance and all the details and making sure that we really actually have really, really good public policy. One of my favorite old time lobbyists, who I talked to quite a bit, he told me one time, if you have legislation that goes through with unanimous support really fast, it's either really good or really bad legislation. So finding the balance between those two things is good. You know, because Minnesota has the only legislature in the country, as you mentioned, and sometimes that adds some challenges to the process, but also some good sort of benchmarks, and make sure that everybody's positions are represented.
Yep.
I suppose the other thing with all of the spending and all of that, we've got a little bit of a budget situation. Senator Uyghur, you were in the legislature through the Great Recession. What did you learn from that I think can be applied to this coming year?
You need to be very prudent in your budgeting. And I want to, compliment, Governor Dayton's leadership, and as we were able to put together a reserve and for a rainy day, and rainy day is here, but right now in our reserve, I believe we have about 2.359 billion. And so there has been federal money that has been coming in to help the impact of the local government and other parts of the economy that are struggling with what's happened. But the importance is having an adequate budget reserve. And we put that reserve in, and for a rainy day, and it's important in the future that we have that available. That will also help preserve our very good credit rating, which makes it easier for infrastructure improvements in the bonding bill. But I would say the key thing I learned is that you need to have a strong reserve, and would continue on that guidance for the future. And there was just recent guidance yesterday or in the last couple of days regarding our own financial situation. I believe we're about $20 million less in anticipated receipts, but everything is laid out, and we have an outstanding office for the budget management led by Commissioner Franz. And for anyone that wants to get more information on the transparency of the budget and the assumptions that are being made, et cetera, just go to that website, and I highly commend it. We're trying to be as transparent as we can with the budget situation, but having a good solid reserve is important.
Yeah, could I just chime in real quickly?
Absolutely.
Senator Uyghur makes a really important point, and that process that was put together to capture part of our surplus and put it into over the years and build up that budget reserve has become a national model. And it really, this is the time when it is seen as so important, because we are obviously going to have to, find places to make some cuts and be particularly prudent with our budgeting in the next, currently, and looking ahead to the next budget cycle. But between the federal funds that we've received so far, hopefully additional federal funds to come, because they are the ones who can deficit spend to help support local communities and the efforts that we need to do. But that budget reserve is going to make a huge difference in our ability to not have to make massive cuts at a time. And if you think about it, during any economic downturn, but particularly one that's caused by a very contagious virus, we need our state resources working for us. We can't cut the Department of Health in this time. Human services are needed more than ever. We've talked about the housing and the food insecurity, for example, the challenges to our seniors and to people with disabilities. And so this is the worst possible kind of time to make those cuts. So it's going to be really valuable so that we can be very thoughtful in how we manage our allocation of resources in the coming couple of years.
I think that's one of the things that a lot of Minnesotans don't generally understand about the budget. The huge pieces of the pie that are health and human services and education, and I believe there's one more great big piece of pie, but I can't remember it off the top of my head.
Higher ed. Higher ed,
yes, there we go. So I know all three of you are well versed in education. That's a specific policy area of focus, and particularly, as Senator Uyghur mentioned, as it relates to workforce. Senator Kent, I know you've been working on getting more school counselors in for a while. Let's talk about that. Representative Fisher, you mentioned before we went live that the ed policy bill was about ready to go. Do you see that being something that can get through in special session?
I would hope so, as it's one of those things that we just, as I recall, is we just ran out of time at the very end there, is that if we would have had a couple more hours that it would have been through. So I would see that hopefully this is one of the bills that we might be able to get up earlier and out of the way. And part of it's also going to depend on is what is this special session going to look like going forward. And most of the items in it are non-financial. They're more just straight policy to help run things better. Some of it is around the COVID issue, trying to make sure that we're able to get things done and wrapped up properly in those kind of areas. So they're trying to get that. There was broad agreement on the bills right as we were ending. And I think if I remember right, I think it passed out of the Senate and came to us, but we just ran out of time, or vice versa. It was one of those two. And so it's just sitting at the desk of the other chamber to take up and bring in. But because we're in special session, that bill's got to be reintroduced again. And so both chambers are going to have to deal with that same issue. But because we passed it before, I don't see it being an issue going forward. But I always hesitate a little bit, because if this year has taught us anything, it seems that at the drop of the hat, we've got a whole new thing that pops up that we were not expecting. I would say that's what I would call this year, is the year of the unexpected, the major unexpected. So we'll just have to see how that all translates as we go forward over the next few weeks and months.
That could very easily go on a t-shirt. 2020, the year of the unexpected. Senator Uyghur from the Senate position, do you have predictions?
Well, during special session tomorrow, I think it's safe to assume we'll probably continue, you'll ultimately, the extended authority for the peacetime emergency would continue. It's still very real, the threat to the public health. And I know that some of the business organizations have asked for a complete reopening, and would invite that continued dialogue with you on that. But I would expect that we'll continue on that. But I want to see the dial move as fast as anyone in terms of getting into the full realm of activities that are out there, but it has to be done responsibly. So I do see that continuing. Representative Fisher mentioned the ed policy bill. I'm sure we will get that done. There's the potential to add some things, but at least what had been agreed to before, that will get done. We have a very powerful motivation for bipartisanship right now, and I would predict that will happen, and we're going to make steps on addressing the racial injustice that's there. The Minnesota Business Partnership put over 13 or 14 recommendations and policy suggestions, and a wide array of groups are coming in, and we can find some of the items that we must pass. And there'll be press conferences probably every day from various groups on it. But we need to come together. I would predict that we will make progress. It's still to be determined what the details are, but I have never had so many emails and phone calls, etc., on the subjects that we are addressing right now. But people of all political stripes are getting these, and I sense the need that we do need to come together, not only in Minnesota, but as a nation. So those points, I would see us moving forward.
Okay, Senator Kent?
I would add, specifically from a business perspective, that we did pass about $30 million for small business emergency loans for businesses that were directly impacted by the executive order closing restaurants, bars, and other places of public accommodation, and that was in the form of loans and grants. And we also passed a small business loan guarantee program and appropriated $10 million to help small businesses impacted by COVID that didn't qualify for SBA disaster assistance. And Senator Uyghur's correct, and we don't know. I mean, I'm not trying to be cute with the agenda. We're still figuring some of these things out. Again, we got a late start on getting ready for tomorrow. But I think we will try to take up things quickly that, as has been discussed, that were really pretty easy left over from regular session that we just ran out of time on, and a couple of these COVID things that we think we can do quickly and get some of these federal funds out into our communities to make a difference as soon as possible. And one of those that we got very close to at the end of session is about $62 million in business emergency loans, a second phase of that. And so we're, there's strong agreement that we need to get that going fast because we know our businesses need that support right away.
So Representative Fisher, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I'm gonna. So one of the things that was interesting to me when we first went through all this was that the House was prohibited, like constitutionally you had to meet in person, and so that turned into the seat of government. So how did that work? Like I saw on Twitter that people were voting from the parking lot, and that, like how did that process work?
It was very challenging, I know, and Senator Kent probably knows some of the dynamics from the Senate side. I know that from the House side, that the number one thing that was guiding us as we were putting forward is how do we do this to make sure our staff stays safe? And that's the big concern, because we've got great staff out there who do a lot of fantastic things, and they've also got the institutional knowledge to help us run. And they are also not easily replaced. If we were to lose our staff, we're not able to function, because they're the ones that make sure that the bills are properly communicated between the chambers and those type of things. So the number one thing was figuring out how do we make sure that the staff is staying safe. And as a result, that was one of the things that helped guide us as we were trying to determine the process. And we realized very early on that meant that how do we do this with social distancing, and how do we live within the Constitution? And it was taking a look at what it said, and it says in the seat of government. Well, the seat of government, some people say, well, that's the state capital. It's kind of like, well, no, because we've had special sessions in other parts of the state. And when we've had special sessions in the past, when the Capitol was under construction, we did it in the in the state office building. And so what helped is being able to find the seat of government is the city of St. Paul. And so what it allowed us to do is be able to pick our places in St. Paul and be able to remote in. And it took trying to figure out how do we do that with technology? How do we do it to make sure that the information is getting communicated back and forth? And initially there were some hiccups, as we all experienced with the new Zoom issues, conference calls. Initially, everybody's trying to do it at the same time, making sure there's enough bandwidth out there. And it not only got complicated here, but some of our colleagues who are in outstate Minnesota, the demands, it showed even higher. The problems that we have with broadband out there is that a lot of those communities don't have the broadband that they need to make these things work. And so as a result, that also highlighted for us is, as we're figuring out how we're going to conduct business and do it legally, is how do we start keeping in mind, how does this apply to other parts of the state? And that's one of the things that we're still concerned about and trying to get more money out there to address the broadband issue. Yeah. But as we were looking at the ways of meeting, the big thing that we realized very early on is when we have committees, how do we get committee input? What was good is a lot of people were used to sending us letters and getting that in, but it was trying to then figure out how do we get that live interaction? And one of the things that was bothersome to a number of us is that those of us who can communicate like we are right now is a privilege. I work with the community on a regular basis who are homeless or experiencing homeless, and they've got no way to be able to provide input in these kind of processes right now. And as a result, it's hard for them so we're not getting the full picture that we used to in the past. When I served on Health and Human Services, it was not unusual that we had a number of people coming in who were testifying before us who did not have the resources that they could use the technology that we have right now. Same with housing. And as a result, I'm somewhat concerned that as we're going forward, we're losing those voices, and we have to figure out a better way to make sure that we're including them in, particularly with the challenges that we're facing today with the racial injustices and everything out there. Is we've got to make sure those voices are being heard. And I think that's the biggest challenge that we've got with the current setup that we have, is making sure that everyone's being pulled in and being able to figure out, if they don't have the ability to communicate with Zoom, how do they get us that information? Because while they may have a cell phone, it's real hard to put together a letter and get that emailed to somebody, particularly if you want to be having pictures with it and everything else. So that puts a very unique dynamic out there. Mm-hmm. I think our leaders have done a great job of getting the framework that we've got right now set up. being able to make it in such a way that we're able to call in from our locations. And sometimes it allows people to stay connected with the communities, particularly in outstate Minnesota. So they're able to, they'll get a little bit more of that personal connection through a social distance way. But we've lost that a little bit when we do our committee hearings. And for me, that's always been a challenge, is not being able to only hear people, but be able to see their full body language, because that can sometimes tell whether you're really connecting and understanding on the issue or not. And that's one of the things that I've struggled with a little bit in this process. And I know that a number of my colleagues in the House and the Senate are the same way. We're longing for the day of when we can eventually be together in a safe way and be able to have people engaged. And that's when we were talking earlier before we started, is like with the subcommittees that I'm on between the House and the Senate, these joint committees, is most of the important work we did was more in a workshop fashion, where we brought in people from the different aspects together, the different groups, and making sure that we can have discussions. We would have, like on the water subcommittee on water, we'd have multiple subgroups going on within a larger context, saying, here are the issues that we're facing, get together groups of 5 or 6 and brainstorm and come to us with ideas. That's really hard to do during Zoom. So some of the real important work we need to do, we've got to figure out how can we get back into that environment. And so that's some of the things that we're looking at. And that's the big challenge we still not been able to figure out in a great way yet.
Yeah, absolutely. Senator Uyghur, I know you need to jump off, so I'm going to give you an opportunity to wrap up for you.
Yes, thank you, Shannon, and participants, for the opportunity to if anyone has a follow-up that they'd like to share with me, do the email, you can text me, you can call me, 651-770-0283. Together we will get through this. I'm very confident of that. And, that's our tradition. This is Minnesota. We'll do it. I'm leaving now for a Zoom call with Century College, which is a very important part of our future workforce for the preparation and retraining too. So I'll give them greetings from you, and let's stay in touch. Thank you, everybody, for your work.
Thank you, Senator. Appreciate it.
Hi, Chuck.
Okay.
So, Senator Kent, the process of voting has been really interesting to watch. As someone who's watched the legislature for several years, voting remotely and then you reporting all those out at the end, like, that was different. Did that require a rules change on the Senate side?
Yeah, and the Senate did take a different approach than the House did, which is, as we all know, not unusual. We often do. But what we did, and Peter made a really great point about the importance of our staff and the ability for them to keep the trains running, because they absolutely are the heart and soul of actually getting the work done. But we actually need our elected members to be able to convene, and we have to have a quorum in order to actually convene. And so part of the conversation that we had as a leadership group was, if we have, and you got to think back in early March, when we were still not sure how this was all going to go, we needed to be conservative and make sure that we had steps in place to make sure that the membership of the bodies could get together and do the work. And so if you think about people who have certain vulnerabilities to the virus and need to self-isolate just to protect themselves, or maybe it's a family member, or if it's an underlying condition or something. So that was an issue. We wanted to make sure that no member felt like they had to come and put themselves in harm's way in order to be able to represent their communities. And so what we did in the Senate was we allowed people to call in to their caucus leader. And so, we will have a certain number of members who will vote from home, and I will speak to them personally and get their votes, and then report them to the Secretary of the Senate. And so that's the way we do that. It is historic. Minnesota senators have never voted other than pushing the button or voting from their desk, so it has been a big deal, but we wanted to make sure that, and the other thing that was a factor is, like, if we did have somebody in the Senate get ill and we needed a number of people to self-quarantine to prevent the spread. That was the other part of it. We just didn't know. So it was important that we had the flexibility, and it has worked out, I think, really pretty well. It has proven, we miss our colleagues, and we miss them as people and colleagues, but we miss having them on the spot to offer their experience and their institutional knowledge of the legislative process and the history of a lot of these issues. But there have been other ways in which it has been, if you consider that we've been, separated literally, I think Zoom calls have been helpful to us to work together so that we're able to connect face to face. Usually we've always, because every year when the legislature adjourns, we spread out all over the state and we don't often see each other. We do things by conference call, and that's just harder. And so doing the video conferencing has been, I think, an asset to us when we do our work while we're not physically together in session. And this has been, as it has been for so many different organizations and businesses, an incredible time of coming together, even as we stay apart, as others say, because we recognize it's an important time to realize of the value of the work that we do and the seriousness of it, like I said, and putting the politics aside so that we can really focus on coming up with solutions that will benefit Minnesotans in just these incredibly challenging times.
Representative Fisher mentioned body language. And I know from my job as a lobbyist and an advocate, like that was how I did my own whip count. You go to a committee meeting and you can kind of see like who's in it and who's not. Right. And the Zoom call, like that helps, but it's still like, if the camera isn't on somebody, you don't know if they are, doing something else or they're engaged. One of the things that I am privileged, I live alone with a little dog. But I am not trying to parent teach at the same time. I don't have kids. Yeah. So we had talked about that just briefly, the broadband requirements, and those kind of things. So it has been jarring to the business community, but anybody who's a parent who is used to having childcare and doing their job, like they're doing both of those things at one time. And kids who, we ask the question, do you have access to a computer at home? Yes. Okay, do you and your siblings and your parents all use the same computer at one time? Like, I think that was the biggest challenge of people trying to juggle. Were you coming up against that in the legislature?
My legislative assistant, Shannon, who he, because of he and his wife and their work situations, he is doing a lot of the parenting. And so, he's answering my phone and doing my scheduling and doing a bunch of stuff to help my constituents. At the same time, he's been doing a lot of the hands-on supervising of the kids. And we've all had to make that work, and he lives not far from where George Floyd was murdered. So, I mean, there's just been a lot of disruption, but we're making it work just like businesses around the country are. My husband works for 3M, and, I laugh because I feel like our society may completely rethink the idea of open living floor plans after this episode. But he was on a call just a few minutes ago, and I'm here. I've turned our dining room into my home office, and I joke that I've had a not great habit throughout my entire career of eating lunch at my desk. And now it's like, oh, I eat lunch at my dining table. This is very strange.
I think it's really interesting sort of opportunity. I mean, anytime anything is a challenge, I have someone close to me who pretty much always reframes challenge is an option. I'm like, well, look at this problem. And he's like, well, look at the opportunity. And okay, yes, absolutely. This is an opportunity to sort of identify and take up some of those issues that do cause those challenges for families and educators. And I mean, we haven't even talked about the remote learning and how big of a challenge that is. Was that something, Representative Fisher, was that something that was already included in the education work that you were doing, or is that an add-on?
In terms of the remote learning, I know that some provisions were put out there to help make it work a little bit easier, but the big problem that we still have out there with remote learning is the access of it, and it comes from a couple of points. As you fit on some of it right now is, the families being able to jump in to help support that. But where it gets real challenging is when you've got people where English is not the first language in the home, and in many cases where the parents have not had even a high school education, particularly with the immigrant population that we have that are doing a number of the key jobs that we need to have done in the state. They don't have that support. And so as a result, a lot of times the remote learning in that area kind of crashes down, particularly when you figure you've got the kids trying to figure out, okay, how do I make this stuff work when we don't have great access to Wi-Fi and those kind of things. And I know a number of the schools were trying to do what they could, putting together hotspots. I know that the job that I've been with, that we were doing things with buying cell phones for kids and helping try to do it along that line. But still, that's not the same. Is people who've been here for generations, they've been able to have their, the support and the network out there, the understanding of how the school system works, to be able to make sure that their kids will continue to succeed. And what's happening is we're finding that the disparities that we've got out there are just going to get worse. And we've got to figure out, how do we do this a little bit differently? And that's the question we haven't figured out yet. We're trying to, and it's going to be one that's not going to be in the short term. It's going to take a little bit longer opportunity. I will also say, though, there have been some instances I've heard from some of the school districts that there are some kids who actually do much better in this kind of environment. They've been thriving because in a large classroom environment, they're too intimidated to talk out and speak out. And as a result, the questions don't get answered, where the environment we have now, they're actually excelling, which starts making you think of how do we rethink our education system so that we can design it so that those who are excelling in this kind of situation can still have that opportunity going forward. And that's where I think we start breaking down some of the issues that we've had in the past and get it more successful for our kids. And then also taking a look as how did this work in communities that are at a disadvantage, figuring out, okay, what worked, what didn't, and try to take those forward to make our education system stronger as we go in the future.
Mm-hmm. Senator Kent?
I just agree 100%. I think Peter summed it up really, really well. And I know, for example, in the Senate Education Committee, Senator Torres Ray, who has worked in education, she has been a just tremendous champion for trying to figure out some solutions to allow districts to use some of their existing funding streams to deal with some of these technological issues. I do think this has been, and I want to point out, when you think about how quickly this all came about, and a lot of schools were on spring break at the time, but many weren't, and that was a part of the timing. And then this announcement came on that they were going to close the buildings and give the teachers and the administrators and the other professionals in the schools time to sort of reconfigure. And it was, I think, a week and a half, to completely redo how we deliver education and learning to our students. And the work that was done there was heroic, I think. Obviously it wasn't perfect because everybody was having to adapt and respond and deal with new technologies and things. And certainly but what came out of this was, as Peter just identified, where are the gaps? I mean, there are gaps that we already know about, and there are gaps that we need to be doing a better job all the time on. But this actually revealed some new ones, like in talking about the way different learning settings work better or worse for different students, because some students who are thriving in the classroom setting were just at a loss without that environment. And then you have the flip of that, where some kids, that very open, lots of people in there, that dynamic was not the best thing for them. And that being in a quieter at home kind of situation really allowed them to thrive. And so this is a real opportunity, back to your point originally, Shannon, that yes, this has brought up challenges, but it has given us an opportunity to really look at some solutions that'll work moving forward.
Mm-hmm. So as sort of a last question, let's keep in with that frame. What are there's been a lot of change for the last couple of months. What is sort of the opportunity for good change that you see?
When you say good change, are you talking education specific, or are you talking more in a general area? Because there's many different ways we can answer. I could answer that. So just wanting to get a little bit more clarification on the question.
Is there anything that you've seen change that you think is a positive and could be helpful moving forward? And that could be general or specific.
I would say that some of the things that are coming out of this is that we are realizing that with the challenges that we've got out there, that we have to rethink a number of our systems across. In some ways, we've already started that because of COVID with the how do we deliver education, taking a look at the disparities that we've got in the health system and figuring out how do we start doing that in a better way. And I think that as we're going forward is taking a look as to how do we do policing in a different situation. I worked in North Minneapolis at a homeless youth shelter for over 12 and a half years. And we were 2 blocks from the 4th Precinct Police Station, 2 blocks from where Jamar Clark was killed. And I know that a lot of people in those communities don't feel safe calling the police. And we have to get to that underlying issue of how do you make it safe? And I've seen some horrible examples out there. When we hear about how George Floyd was murdered, years ago, it was not unusual that I would see traffic stops occur on the street. They would pull the person out of the car. One person would sit on the person that was in handcuffs on the ground, and the other person, they would call in their friend on the cell phone, and the other person would arrive and they would search the car, and then they let the person go. In the meantime, the person's asking, what have I done wrong? What have I done wrong? And the police are saying, don't say anything because number one, it's 2 against 1. Nobody's going to believe you. Plus, we also know where you live. These are the implied things that were happening. Or the instances where, where I was seeing that outside of our place, sometimes people would miss the corner and hit the cars on the side. We had one in the past year where a woman who was obviously intoxicated, Caucasian, blonde, hit one of our youth's car on the side of the street, really damaged the car. We called the police. This person is obviously intoxicated. This was at 8:30 in the morning. Some issues out there. The police arrived. They're being real nice to the person who ran in, who was driving, offering to drive her home. Where do you need to go? We'll take you there. And then when our youth gets out there, our youth is a person of color. They gave her a bad time saying, well, you should know better than to park your car on the side of the road. You've got 24 hours to get your car moved out of the way or else we're going to ticket and tow you. So when you've got a community that's used to seeing that, it makes you really think we've got to figure out how to do this separately. And I've got to tell you, there are many times having worked in Minneapolis, we did not call the police on minor things that came up because we didn't want to have the wrong person showing up and end up with a much worse situation than we started with. And so we have to really think of how do we get the right people out there? And I will go to an example of people having mental health issues. We should really think of who is delivering those systems out there is saying, when we have a fire, we send the fire department right hand. If we've got someone with a heart attack, they get a person that is a paramedic out there taking care of them. So when somebody's having a mental health issue, why don't we send somebody trained specifically in mental health? Why do we send somebody who's armed with a gun? This is where some of these things escalate out. And unfortunately, the police are put in a bad situation. These are situations the police should not be dealing with. So we need to rethink the system and say, what are the things that we're putting on the police departments right now that they should not have to deal with? Pull those out, put the funding in that needs to take care of those systems. And that's going to start giving us much better outcomes out there. And these are the things that we really have to start focusing on, and then focusing on the base and inequalities under there. When I take a look at the housing situation, it's amazed me, I shouldn't say amazed me, it has frustrated me over the last few years that so often when I'm putting together rent support checks, trying to help get the dollars out there to get youth of color into housing, how that the challenges and the barriers that they face are much different than those who are white or have white sounding names. These are real things that are happening out there. We have to take a look also as a society, how are we approaching some of those type of things? These are things that are going to require some very hard, tough conversations about all of us, because we need to change how we do the system, recognize where the barriers are, and while it might be working well for us, it does not work well for a significant part of our brothers and sisters who are of color or who are indigenous. And we have to start re-examining those things. And that's one of the things I want to leave us with, is recognizing we've got to start doing the hard work. I know that in the housing subcommittee I'm on, we've been doing some of those hard discussions behind the scenes already. I've been having that discussion with the people of the League of Cities. I've been having that with my Republican colleagues, both in the House and the Senate. They recognize it. And part of the fear of getting some of that work done is that we're afraid we're going to say the wrong thing and make the problems worse. And what we have to realize is that our brothers and sisters of color and who are indigenous know we're going to make mistakes, but also they feel that if we're out there doing the work and trying to tackle it and trying to move forward, that they'll be there to help support us. And in other areas, it's important that we support them as they're coming out with those issues. And I think those are some of the bigger things that we have to recognize and keep in mind as we're moving forward on anything, whether it's in housing, whether it's in jobs, whether it's in health, whether it's in education, whether it's in environment. And I'll point out environment is when we had the water gremlin issue, the lead poisoning that happened was primarily hitting kids of people of color. You know, and so those are the kind of things that we have to keep in mind is how does that happen? Air pollution more often hits communities of color than it doesn't. You know, and those are the type of things that's recognizing it and keeping that in the back of the mind as we're dealing with all these issues, making sure that we're not leaving these voices behind. And I think that's where we start getting systems that then starts moving us together as the one Minnesota that we are. You know, I've seen the hope out there. When I take a look at our people from the surrounding communities that were providing food and diapers and everything coming together to help our people in Minneapolis and St. Paul. You take a look at the amount of money that people are willing to donate to help address the problems out there. People want that. Our community, our state wants us to work together to pull us forward and take the terrible thing that we've been through and take us to the next step. And I think that's where us as leaders have that challenge and that responsibility to start these hard conversations one-on-one and then bring them together in large groups so people can feel safe, and then figuring out how do we better support each other so that people are able to have the proper education, succeed there so that they can get the living wage jobs that make them successful and be able to afford the housing going down the road, which in turn give them better health outcomes. So these are all tied together. We've got to recognize that as we move forward.
Well said, and that sounds like a big job. I know you all are up to the task, and so we definitely appreciate your time this morning. We're at time, and I think we could have this conversation for another hour, but I want to be respectful of everybody's time. So thank you both for being with us today and sharing those things with us, but also just for the work that you're doing every day on behalf of the Maplewood area community. So we would normally say, hey, audience, you know, applause. That seems a little silly on the Zoom call, but know that we are applauding you in our own homes.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Shannon. Thank you, Representative Fisher, Senator Kent as well. Thank you to our sponsor for the Maplewood Area Business Council, the Highway Federal Credit Union, and thank you everybody for participating today.
Awesome. Our next meeting is on July 9th, so we will get out some more information on that soon. So everybody have a great day.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.